All right, so welcome everybody. I don't know if we'll have some more folks joining as we go along here, but I'm Rob Hausam, MD, and I'm here to talk with you about the International Patient Summary and subtitled presentation, Opening New Horizons for Clinical Data Exchange, which is definitely what we hope that this project will help us to do. So again, thanks for being here, and we'll go ahead and get going. I got quite a few slides, and I may have to go through some kind of quickly, but hopefully it'll give you an overview of what the project is about, what we're trying to do, where we've been, where we are now, and hopefully where we're wanting to go with this. So we'll get going. All right. So this gives you a rough idea of what I'm planning to talk about. We won't be spending most of the time on the HL7 side of things and not so much on the SEN side, as you see there, but some background and kind of goals and basically requirements and some shared vision that we have amongst the participants, and like I said, where we are and where we're headed with it. And so we'll go ahead and so the context and the landscape for this is that the concept of a patient summary itself is not a new thing. It's been in existence for a long time, basically since we've been keeping records for healthcare. In fact, it's pretty ubiquitous. It's part of just the general fabric of healthcare, but people have a lot of their own ideas about what it is, and so there's maybe a little confusion out there, and their own ideas about what it is and what it should do. So we're trying to help clarify some of that. And it's a simple concept, but it comes with a fair bit of baggage in that regard. So, all right. So over the last decade, we've had quite a bit of activity in this space, and this talks about what's happened in Europe. The EPSOS projects have been involved with doing cross-border pilots for the patient summary and various exchange, and they've been doing that since from 2009 to 2014. And there's been a number of other initiatives there, and they've developed some guidelines from the eHealth network that are all related to this. And then across the Atlantic, on the U.S. side, there's been the EU-US Memorandum of Understanding from the ONC, and some basically cooperation with the European Trillium Project. And the initial work, the Memorandum of Understanding was generated in 2010, and then the initial work was called the InterPass Project back in 2013. And there's this notion of the transatlantic eHealth, health IT cooperation roadmap. So all this has been going on in the background, and that's led into our current project that we're talking about. And so another piece of that is the Joint Initiative Council, which is basically a group that sort of tries to bring together the various standards efforts in ISO, HL7, SEN, and a variety of others to try to come up with some kind of common vision about that, and they've tackled the patient summary as one of their recent work items. But back prior to that, even in ISO, we've got a technical report that was published in 2009 about what a patient summary is, and the notion there is it's a health record extract comprising standard collection of clinical and contextual information, basically to provide a snapshot of a subject of care's health information and their health care. So, I got a duplicate slide there. Sorry about that. No, actually, I got another part here. So, but it's international in scope, and that means basically we're emphasizing the need to provide, general solutions that can be applied globally, and definitely are not tied to any particular region or country. So we're not focused certainly not just on the U.S. We're not focused just on Europe. We're basically looking for something that we can apply for patients' needs across the globe. And so it's a kind of a lofty goal. A lot of folks have said that it's not achievable. I've heard that more than once, but I think as hopefully I'll show here in a moment, we're making some progress in getting something that hopefully will be useful for folks. And I'll definitely save time at the end for you guys to ask some questions, and I'll be hopefully showing some stuff that's at least a little bit of the reality of where we are with the spec and some of the things we can do with it. All right. So this European participation, they've been, the EU and US have been the big, the big drivers of this so far in the project. But again, we're looking for global participation. We have folks who are not in the US or the EU who are involved, and I'll be talking about that a little bit. But the CEN group in Europe is basically the TC251 there. They're a regional SDO, and they started out with not having any real funding to do this, and they were kind of felt like they were being left behind, but they made this proposal to eHealth Network and got involved, and their work started on this in September 2016. And basically the idea for that is to participate, they want to be, work with the other international standards bodies, HL7 in particular, to develop this, the single standard that everyone, basically can be able to use. So that's the foundation on which the shared work was based, and the starting point, for dialogue and cooperating on it. So with all of that background, basically we ended up with a joint, shared vision and a shared project, which is now we call IPS, International Patient Summary. The original acronym INTERPASS, some people might have heard of, but this is a little simpler and I think more recognizable, and that's what our current project is called. All right. So with that, we basically got together, we had a meeting in Oslo back in, I guess it was late 2016, and came up with some shared vision and scope. So basically what, the idea is to further the care of citizens across the globe, we're going to collaborate on a single common international patient summary specification. Hopefully that's readily usable by ideally all clinicians. And we started with the focus on a cross-border unscheduled care of a patient. And we'll talk a little more about, we're trying, doing more to expand that scope, but that's where we started. And it focuses on a minimal, non-exhaustive summary, patient summary, and it's agnostic to specialty and also condition. It's not based on any particular conditions, but it still provides a clinically relevant set of data. And so there's some principles that were agreed to in Oslo, being implementable, applicable for global use, extensible and open, and sustainable. And then, we basically came up with 4 deliverables, which you can't really see that part very well, I don't think, but basically it's got there's 2 HL7 implementation guides, one in CDA and one in FHIR, and then there's 2 CEN documents that relate to that from the European side. You'll see a little bit bigger diagram for that. So this is basically, we started working on the CDA guide first, and we have a published version of that as of September 2018 as a standard for trial use in HL7. And we've got, so that's just a little snippet of what it looks like, but that's out there. It's available as a standard right now. And so once we got that published, then we rapidly shifted focus to try to move to a FHIR implementation guide that we could get out as quickly as possible. That would basically be, ideally as close as possible aligned with the CDA guide, and would provide, that capability in the obviously emerging FHIR standard. And I think our thought is that probably, given the momentum, the way things are going, we're more likely to see ultimately a lot of use in FHIR than we are in CDA. But there's lots of folks who have been doing work in CDA, and so we really need both. And so we got the CDA published, and then we moved to the FHIR. So this is a snippet of the latest version of the continuous integration build that we have out there, and you've got the URL up at the top where you can find it. We made a decision a while back. There's some debate about which version of FHIR we should land on. This was over a year and a half ago, or something like that, where it wasn't quite so clear. There was quite a bit of work among vendors in STU3 and DSTU2, in fact. And it was FHIR R4 was still a kind of a new idea, and it wasn't absolutely clear where things were going to end up. But we made the decision. It seemed like a strategic thing to move to FHIR R4 because that's where the first normative content would be and all that. So that's what we did, and I think that the way things have developed, I think that was probably a wise decision. But we'll find out. But so we don't have a published version of the FHIR guide yet, but we're working to get there as rapidly as we can. And we do have 2 balloted versions from May and September of 2018, and we're going to go back to ballot again here in September of this year. So. All right, so this slide just shows you a little bit more. You can actually see at this time the 4 deliverables that we are talking about, the primary ones. So we've got on the EU side, we've got the SEN, and I don't remember exactly which acronyms the numbers are, so I can't really tell you that detail exactly, but that all comes from the SEN side, and then the HL7 side is the foundation below it. So basically, again, the regional work from SEN and hopefully from other jurisdictions around the world will be based on the HL7 international work that we're actively getting out to ballot. So that will form the basis for all the other efforts, and they can all hopefully be workable together. All right. So this is another little bit slightly different view, kind of the similar thing, but basically these are the global standards down here from the HL7 international side, and then the local standards like Europe are up here. Okay. So, all right, so a little bit about the principles we talked about in the data set. The data set's a minimal one, basically meaning we're not trying to provide all the data that's out there. We're trying to provide a minimal set that's useful for folks to be able to deliver care in the appropriate situations. It's non-exhaustive, that's part of what I just said, but so it can't be everything, can't be the whole entire EHR. It's again, we said specially agnostic, so we're not, we don't have any particular, we're not focusing only on primary care or focusing on a particular, diabetes care or some other cancer care or anything like that. It's trying to be able to be useful for all of those. And again, it's not based on any specific conditions. All right. But again, just to reiterate, it's still clinically relevant for provision of care. So the principles part is that it's again implementable, applicable for global use, extensible and open, just like FHIR is. And that's a little trickier on the CDA side, it's not quite so much, but we're trying to keep those same principles, and sustainable. So they're pretty lofty goals, and I don't know how well we're doing at achieving all of them, but we're definitely trying to do that. And applicable for global use is something that we keep running into, particularly as we think about aligning with, which you'll hear a little more about in a minute, local standards like Argonaut and so forth. We have to keep in mind the fact that we are still working on a global standard here, and we can't necessarily follow what any one particular jurisdiction does in certain areas. So, all right. So this minimal reflects the idea of basically, again, that it's a summary and it's concise, and there's a core data set of items that, at least ideally, any healthcare professional can use. Looks like, Brent, got a question?
Mind if I interrupt you with a question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Brent.
Can you touch a little bit more on how you determine what the clinically relevant is? Like how do you, it's a big bucket, right?
It is.
How do you pick what to put in?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is kind of, it's a bit ad hoc. We've got various experts that basically are involved in the project. They have various backgrounds, and including some clinicians, including myself, and we try to solicit input from all of the stakeholders who express interest, and basically kind of collect those requirements and all that, and come up with what we think is a reasonable effort at it. And then we put it out to ballot, and we say, let the community look at it and say, well, do you guys agree with our choices? And we get feedback and respond to the ballot comments. I mean, that's sort of like most things in HL7. It's a bit ad hoc, but we're trying to be as inclusive as we can.
Have you considered a way to maybe we should just talk.
Yeah, maybe, but yeah, I mean.
Maybe
So maybe maybe we can talk a little more in, later or in the question time, about some of those details. But one thing is we are trying to make the standard open so that data can be included if someone thinks it's important. If it's not necessarily part of the described standard, then other people may or may not use it or whatever. But we're trying to be as open and inclusive in that regard as we can. And if we hear requirements from folks, we want to try to do our best to deal with those. All right. Yeah. So non-exhaustive just says, it's basically, this is what I was already starting to say. It's not closed, likely to be extended. So again, if we hear things like from folks, what Bryn's talking about, we can evolve and incorporate those things if they're significant. But we, don't put them in until we've had some review process on that. Especially agnostic and condition independent, again, just means that, it's a starter set of data. It's designed kind of maybe like the 80-20 rule, to try to fit what's useful for 80% of situations, but not going to get all the exotic, specialty kind of things necessarily out of the box anyway. All right, so we're trying to promote the evolution and convergence of the existing standards, rely on things that are already there, and basically consider new things as they become available. That's to be implementable. And then global use, again, what we're looking for here, this has kind of been one of our tougher ones, and it's kind of alluding to before, but we want to make this available for everyone and for free, and that includes our terminologies, which we'll see a little bit about that. And sometimes that kind of hits up against some other requirements that other folks have, and trying to figure out the right balances there can be tricky. You can't meet it's impossible to meet everyone's needs totally across the globe, of course, but we're trying to be as comprehensive as we can. So that's, anyway, but we're... That would include SNOMED. Well, SNOMED I'll talk about a little bit more, but yes, that's where one of our big issues comes in, is whether they have a different model of licensing and availability than what we're looking for here, and so we've kind of gone a bit back and forth on that. But we are incorporating and including SNOMED, and some of their recent choices have made that easier for us to do, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay. And that's alluded to here. Basically, there's different free. I was reading that wrong, but free text. So if we don't have terminologies or whatever, then there's still text is available and all that. Now that may not be real good in a cross-language situation. But we give people what we have, and hopefully as much of it as possible will be useful. Okay, so let's see, what else? Again, open to emerging solutions and new things that might come up. IDMP is one example in the medication space. That's been another tricky area because, most jurisdictions have their own local medication, situation, and hardly anybody's sharing those. And global standards are kind of pretty hard to come by. And SNOMED makes an attempt at it, but it's got its licensing issues, and it's not updated real frequently. And there's just not a lot that really works across the globe. So IDMP has some promise, but is mostly an idea rather than a reality at this point. So that's still a point of, we're trying to work through for the best solution on. All right. And then, we're looking for building maintenance and update processes that we can keep this going, and also trying to ensure clinical validity and relevance. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we focused initially on the unscheduled cross-border care. It's basically when I travel to Europe, or somebody in Europe, or travels to the U.S., or whether it's Asia, or wherever it might be, Africa, South America, it could be anywhere. But again, we're crossing borders and boundaries of our usual care settings, and we may deal with language issues and all those things. And we'd like, for people to be able to have their data available, so if they get into a situation where they, need, health care in one of those places outside of their normal districts, and that those providers would have a useful set to start with, That's what we're trying to do. But there's, of course, challenges of how that's going to get delivered. And in the specification, we're not actually trying to say how it should be delivered. We're trying to provide a specification to represent it, and then work let folks work out the delivery mechanisms. But I will just say, this is not part of my slide, but I really think that this is going to be one of the ways that is going to be most useful for delivery. And patients take own their own data, they take it with them, and hopefully it'll be in the FHIR or certainly a form that folks can use. So, all right. So the next few slides are just kind of talking about how we started and how we're progressing. Basically, again, the cross-border and scheduled care, and then from there, we're looking at, well, what else could you do? As you get farther in the future, you could add increasing details and different capabilities, that provide some additional potential, so you can expand and the scope of this and make it more and more useful. And then hopefully we can do more to achieve acceptance and adoption, and that's going to continue to to build on top of what we had before. And this is the notion about extending the use case, which is what we're doing in our current work and in our latest upcoming ballot and all that. So we started with the adult person and the demand for care, unplanned or unscheduled, but this sort of gives the progression of what happens when the patient summary is received and all that. So it's going through that process, but the idea is we want to be able to not just have adult persons, but be able to deal with all ages and deal with local needs and as well that are relevant. And then we've got things like GDPR, the new legislation that we have to deal with for privacy and all those kind of things, and try to be able to be reflective of all those things. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time. And this is kind of starts with a little bit of a fuzzy picture, just some basic data here, kind of talking more about how the progressive idea works. But then you extend that and you can add some additional more specific data and begin to expand on that, and then you get a clearer picture the farther you go. So we're looking at that approach. All right, but again, coming back, I already said this, but the IPS, the International Patient Summary, is not an EHR. It's not going to be a longitudinal record of everybody's data from birth to death, or from entry to a health system to exit of the health system, and everything in between. It again has to be summarized, and again, I think, as Bryn was asking, I mean, how do you know what's relevant? Well, you have to kind of figure that out as you go and do your best job clinically to determine that. Okay. So, but even though it's not an EHR, it could be the basis for, let's say, in Europe, an EHR exchange format, things that and that would be true of any other place potentially across the globe. So let's see, we can kind of skip over this one, I think, mostly, but well, I'll say a couple of things about it. I mean, we started with the summary as kind of a whole, but we're also looking at, well, how can you make use of individual pieces of that? Can this be a library of reusable, common, core set of data with common terminologies and have it extensible? Basically, make it, can you use the fragments, the resources as building blocks? And so in our latest ballot, we're working on moving more in that direction. And so you kind of see the picture of what that would look like. And this is showing basically a picture of the yellow vaccination card. So maybe your main immediate need is immunization data, and IPS has got a standard for being able to represent that. And so you could, if you need to kind of use that piece, we want to make that available for folks to be able to leverage and do things in common with that. And that'd be true of any of the other clinical areas. All right, so this slide talks about an example kind of where this was tried out a bit back in October of last year. There was an exercise in Europe called the EU MODEX. I don't remember what MODEX stands for, to be honest, but it was held in Bucharest, and basically it was basically modeling a disaster scenario and bringing folks all across Europe together to how would you deal with this large-scale, disaster, and how would you exchange, this data that would be relevant to that? So IPS is a perfect idea to, to be able to, to provide that kind of data. So they had the mobile field hospital, counter reports built on the IPS resources, and they were able to, have these various building blocks for that, immunizations, allergies, problems, results, medications, and various actors involved, which details probably too small to see really, but some real world kind of simulated exercises and showing how this data can be exchanged, and that was done successfully using the FHIR version of IPS. It was the European version based on SQ3 in that particular instance, but that's all moving again towards the common R4 here soon. All right, so it's IPS is a document, and when you look at our site, you'll basically see it's fairly document centric, and that's the the primary and current intended use. But it does have the future plans for being able to be more as a library in addition to a document. All right, so let's see. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one, but some notions about what the framework is and how the life cycle goes. Let me skip over that. This is a busy picture, which you might, if you are interested, it talks about the specific relationships between the SEN and the CDA and the FHIR and all that, and where Argonaut fits in, both currently and in the future, and Trillium in Europe, and a variety of other specific things. So a lot of busyness there, but it gives you an idea of the relationships. And so the IPS, we're thinking of this as basically kind of as a best practice, to be able to exchange data. And this collaboration, particularly between US and Europe with HL7 and SEN, has worked really quite well. We've got basically four specifications that are either at or near completion in just about a 2-year process, and plan to continue and extend that. And there's a few more things regarding the collaboration framework, and this gets to this slide here. This part gets back to the terminology area, and particularly with SNOMED CT, and the notion of a free subset of SNOMED CT. That's something, SNOMED has, a member country type licensing arrangement, and so if you are a SNOMED member country, then you have free use of everything in SNOMED. If you're not in a member country, like a few countries in Europe, like currently Germany and France, are still not members, although I believe Germany is going to become one soon, but it hasn't happened yet. But I'm not sure when France will or if they will, but anyway, there's a few countries that aren't doing it, and there's a lot of countries around the globe that still, that are not members. And so if you want to use SNOMED in those areas, you have some issues, and you either have to get your own individual license or whatever. But we're trying to kind of work out a middle ground approach, I guess, to this. So getting, if SNOMED will release, as they are doing now, a set of concepts that could be used for purposes of the International Patient Summary, then make them available for everyone to use, then that would be a step in the right, at least in direction of making this work. And they have agreed to publish a set of these concepts now, just in the last few months, and they're working on some extending the notion of that. It's kind of continues to evolve even over these last 2 or 3 months. We had a SNOMED meeting in London, and we've had some further progress since then. But the SNOMED subset, was about a little over 8,000 concepts that the IPS project proposed for the free set, and I think it was 8,140 if I remember correctly, and over a variety of areas. We didn't include some big ones like the medications, again, because it's really too big and you couldn't really subset it very well. But we got some very important ones, clinical findings and conditions, basically reportable microorganisms, a variety of other things that people really need to be able to exchange. So those are included. Yeah, got a question?
Do you happen to know if the SNOMED CT subset is also free if I derive from the IPS? So I have my own project, derive directly from the IPS, can I still use these codes?
So it's not, you're saying using outside, so a project different than the IPS.
But based on the IPS.
Based, oh yeah, that would be fine, I think. Yeah. And it's actually a little bit broader than that too. Graham?
You might have said this, but I missed it. Does IPS require the use of the snowmelt subset?
It's not requiring it, no.
Okay.
It's,
You just can use it, but you don't have to.
it's recommending it in some, I mean, like in some areas, but we're not requiring it, no. I mean, although, I mean, ideally we'd kind of like to be able to do that because we'd like to say that everybody, we want to get to a common terminology that everyone can exchange and use. If everybody still does their own thing and, you use terminology X and I use terminology Y and all that, then we're not going to achieve the interoperability we're really looking for. So it's figuring that right balance out,
So when you say recommended, is that a preferred binding?
We've got a variety of different bindings, and we do have some preferred bindings there, yeah. But I don't remember actually which ones are preferred at the moment. We can go look. If we have a second to take a look at it, that might be the best way to do it. But let me just say a couple more words about this. IPS originally was going to get the set for IPS agreed by SNOMED just for use in the IPS, but now they've extended their idea. They've come up with this thing that they're calling now the global patient set. And so they're taking all the free set requests from IPS, from HL7, and then from DICOM and blanking on what are some of the other ones. But there's several other, IHE's got one and all that. And they're going to combine them all into a single free set now and make it available for anybody to use for any of those purposes. So that's even less restrictive, and it's about 43,000 or so concepts now. Again, it may or may not meet all of your needs, anything in particular you're doing, but it's a place to start, and then once they get feedback, then they can see how it's working, and they can expand and extend it potentially, and hopefully we can make it better and better. Okay, so let's see. We saw the basic idea of this. I'm going to skip past it. Moving forward, I just have a few more slides, and then hopefully I'll show a couple of quick things at the end here. All right. So our timelines, we've, like I said, we published the CDA guide. We passed ballot, our second ballot in September 2018. We're balloting again this September, and the main purpose of that is aligning with Argonaut, the Argonaut specification and additional implementer feedback that we've gotten. We want to try to be as closely aligned as possible. We're expecting to publish officially the IPS FHIR IG STU before the end of this year, hopefully sometime in the mid or late fall. And SEN is also working ahead and moving toward publication this fall as well on the European side. So the alignment with Argonaut, this is a couple of slides about this, but this, if we can do that, it opens up wider opportunities, for working with, systems, large vendors, who might be able to more easily incorporate IPS in their offerings. And so I think it should be a win-win on both sides. And so we're in the process of still determining all the things that need to be done there. And we're not expecting to fully align terminology because Argonaut, at least right now, is a US-based specification and it has US terminology requirements. And we're going to stick with the IPS is a global standard. Like I said, it still has, IPS still has the I, it's still international. It's not going to be US or any other realm specific. But we'd love to get feedback on that. So if you're an HL7 member or if you're an interested party who can pass ballot comments on for that, that would be great to have. Okay. And we got some other things that are happening. Argentina has started a very large scale project with this, and I want to show a little bit of what they have done here in just a moment. But we've got interest in Norway and Italy and Canada and UK and a bunch of other places, and that's really good to see. And
sorry, just in case you want to update that slide, at HL7 Germany, we decided that while we move our core profiles from STU3 to R4, that we're going to harmonize with IPS and also actually kick some of our observation profiles completely and just refer to IPS, like smoking status and stuff like that.
Okay.
There's nothing German about that.
Yeah, well, great. Thanks, Simone. Yeah, appreciate that. So let's see if there's anything else here. Basically, but we expect this to further develop and evolve, and we really want to focus on getting people who can actually implement and use this. So that's where we're trying to spend some energy on. All right, and basically, slide about IPS ecosystem. I'll kind of quickly go through this, but eventually we hope it kind of looks more like this overall. So, and that's basically the slides. And I do have a couple of things I want to show real quick. If we got some time. I'm sorry there isn't more time for this and questions, but this is the actual specification that's out there. I showed the URL for that before, and you can look at it. But if I can get my cursor to move properly here. Can't see. There it is. Okay. All right. So I wanted to show, I mentioned Argentina a little bit, and I wanted to show this. They have created an IPS viewer, and Diego Kamenker and Fernando Campos have worked on this, and they made it available. And I just want to show you just a snippet of what that might look like. I will go back quickly and show you what an example looks like. And this is a big example, and you won't be able to see a whole lot of it probably, but I doubt if that shows up very well on the screen. But it's, anyway, typical FHIR JSON. So I'm not going to try to go into details of that, but let me grab a copy of one of these. This is another view of one, and I'm going to copy that into the viewer. And let's see. So if we click on the button, then we're going to see that we've got patient summary as of July 20th, 2017. That's a couple of years old, but that's all right. And just a little bit of the view of what's shown up here. So again, this is a simple viewer, and it's a kind of a limited data set, but you see the allergies, active problems, current medications, and and basically, actually I'm not sure what that one's there for, but anyway. That's an idea of, we're starting to get a little bit of applications out there and all that, and like I said, the folks from Argentina are doing some good work, and they're starting to implement it on a wide scale, and we're starting to see some interest in implementations, from other folks as well, like I mentioned, and we're hoping we'll get more and more of those, and hope if you guys, any of you have interest of participating, or people who ought to know about this, I'd love to have you inform them and all that. And I think I might have a minute or two. Well, probably about the end of the time. We can maybe take a couple of minutes for questions. So, yeah.
How this compares to the Apple's personal health record that's on the iPhone?
Oh, yeah. Well, we haven't really necessarily done a direct comparison with that, but they're basically basing their work on their earlier Argonaut work, as I understand. So we basically have the comparison document between the Argonaut R4 version, basically from the US Core R4 to IPS, and that's what we're working on the alignment with. So I think my understanding is that Apple's going to move forward with following what the US Core does, and again, if we can achieve alignment, then we hopefully will see some convergence on the mobile platform and all that. So I don't know if that answers the question completely, but things seem to be all kind of moving in a converging direction rather than diverging, so that's a good thing.
That's good on the one side. On the other side is, of course, a little difficult for implementers if you know that Apple is basically moving with all its power into this field. So but again, I think there's a reasonable chance that they will be able, to align with and adopt IPS as part of their core as well. And I know we've talked to them a bit. They're looking at it. I don't know where they're at, what they're going to decide to do. But okay. Any other questions?
A question regarding the mapping to snowmen.
So,
if you recommend or say this is one of the standards that could be used to represent data that you could later translate into other languages.
Yeah.
Even if they provide a set of free codes, how would someone go about doing the actual mapping so that it's correctly mapped and then it's useful afterwards to show it to a doctor in another country? Because you can always map it wrong and then maybe have a problem there. Or if there's no valuable mapping for another country.
Yeah, those are really good questions, and they're not necessarily simple answers to them. But ideally, you know, if it would be in SNOMED member countries, then you wouldn't have any issues with the licensing, and the SNOMED National Release Center for that country would undertake to do the language translation and those kinds of things, and any mappings that were required, like say if they have local terminologies that they need to be dealing with in their country. That's how you'd like to see it happen. But again, if we're talking about non-member situations and different languages that aren't officially supported by SNOMED right now, I mean, it basically would be up to interested folks to undertake to do it, and you'd have to try to do the best job that you can. And there's no, I mean, mapping is a tedious and somewhat error-prone exercise, as I think you're alluding to. So I think the community has to eventually, you know, you have to see what kind of resources you can bring to bear and try to put as robust a process around as you can, and then review it and let the community figure out if it's useful or not, and hopefully correct any errors that are found, you know, work it out over time. That's the best I can come up with at the moment. All right, I think we're over time, so I guess we better end here. Thanks for your attendance and questions. All right, okay. And I guess it's lunch or something, right? I think so. Let's enjoy that.